Hey guys, it's Bill from BlenderBrit. Welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at materials, creating some nice realistic, grimy, grungy materials, covering quite a few. In fact, I'll just show you, probably going to be easier. There we go. Get rid of that window. Okay, so yeah, we're going to be making this kind of wooden floor material, some grimy glass, marble, scratched up chrome, this kind of dirty gun metal type of material, whatever you want to call it, plastic, and this cloth as well. Quite a lot to cover, so let's stop listening to me chat rubbish and get started. Okay, before we get started with the actual materials, I just want to show you the scene for a moment and some of the render settings that I'm using. I'll turn to rendered mode. What we've got here is a basic sort of material ball, which we'll be applying our materials to. We've got a rather basic scene, just a floor and an environment map with some lights on it, basically to for the reflections to have something to catch. And that is pretty much it for the scene. As far as settings go, quite a low number of bounces, pretty much 8 across the board. Caustic shouldn't be on, I'll turn that off. Filter glossy's at 1, and I've got the clamp at 4 for direct and 1 for indirect. I'll be rendering at about 500 samples just to keep the times down, though for a lot of these materials, due to the glossy reflections, you'll probably want to go somewhere between 1000 and 1500 to get the best results, but 500 is enough to judge what we're doing anyway. And that is about it for the scene setup. Right, so the first material we're going to make is a plastic. So I'm going to call it matte_plastic. The reason I'm going to put matte at the beginning is because if you look here, we've got a bunch of materials for the material ball, and if we prefix all of our materials with matte, I'll be able to keep them separated. So first we'll put in the very basic setup that you would have seen probably a million times before in various tutorials, which is Diffuse Shader mixed with a Glossy Shader via a Fresnel. So let's do that. Drop in a colour. Go. Apologise for the car driving past. It's quite warm today, so I've got all the windows open. Not much I can do about that, I'm afraid. Okay, so there is our sort of basic plastic setup. Now, while not terrible, it's not particularly interesting, and in my opinion, way too shiny. If you look at most plastics, they're not quite this. They're not quite this shiny, especially these forward-facing faces. Just a bit too much shine on them. And the reason for that, if I hit Control Shift and left click on Fresnel, I'm using the Node Wrangler add-on, which I don't normally include with the tutorials, but considering this one's so node based, I had to. It would just take too long otherwise. With the Fresnel node, now if you think the mix shader, a black value will mean that it's only using this, and a white value will mean it's only using this, and any greys in between will be a mix of the two. Now, with a Fresnel node, it's always grey, regardless of what you change this to. You can't get a black value. If I go 1.1, well, you can go that low. It's not really the effect we're after, because then you get no shine at all on the outside. There's no way to get a black value that looks right. So I picked up a little method from Cinecat Pro. He's got a YouTube channel with some amazingly good tutorials, way more technical than this one's going to be, but a really good watch if you are in the mood for drinking a lot of coffee and getting a headache. Now seriously, check the guy out, brilliant tutorials. But this little technique I picked up from him is really, really useful. First thing I'm going to do is keep this Fresnel node here, duplicate it, and then to keep the refraction numbers in check, I'm going to put in a value node. Copy this value into there, 1.5, drop it there, like so, and then I'm going to bring in a geometry node, and use the incoming factor. Now what that does, if I Control-Shift-click this one, it's just using that grey, the same grey that we've got here at the forward-facing faces, but all over, which allows us to then use a math node to subtract that away from the original one, and that gives us the black that we're after, as you'll see in a moment. So let's drop that in there, take a look at that node, and voila, we've got our black, which is exactly what we need. So let's drop that into our factor there, reconnect that, and we've lost some of that shininess. If I just connect that there so we can look at the difference, too shiny, perfect. For the sort of dull plastic that we're trying to make here. All of the materials I've chosen for this are the sort of materials that you're going to use a lot around the house if you're making an interior scene. So there's going to be a lot of grime and grunge and dirt, and not very much of it is going to be too shiny. I personally find with a lot of interior renders that they look stunning, but just too shiny. The real world isn't quite that clean and crisp, and this is certainly the first stage of getting rid of some of that. The next thing we're going to do is focus on this glossy shader, because we've got a very uniform amount of gloss at the moment, and we can obviously sharpen that by lowering the roughness or blur it out by increasing it, but it's still very uniform regardless. So we're going to use a texture to affect this value. Now another feature of Node Wrangler is if you have a by the way, if you've not used Node Wrangler before, you don't have to download it. It's built into Blender. Just go to your add-ons, type in Node, turn on Node Wrangler. Anyway, yeah, another feature is with a shader selected, press Ctrl-T, and it will bring in an image texture, mapping node, and a texture coordinate. So you've got all the nodes that you have to put in pretty much every time you use the image texture, and it does it all for you. So let's open up a texture. I've got all of the ones I'll be using today in this folder here, none of which I can share because they are bought textures in most cases. They're from two websites, textures.com and polygon.com with two eyes. I'll link them in the video. Both brilliant sites, and a great resource for getting textures. And the one we're going to use here is this wiping residue, which you find all over the place. It's a really nice texture I found. Now mapping wise, by default it's selected to be UV. I haven't UV unwrapped this because there's no need, so we'll be using a object based coordinate, which means we'll need to change the image texture to box, and then we can change this blend amount to blend things out a bit. If I view the actual image texture, there we go, we can see what we're doing. Best way to think about box select, by the way, is imagine that the texture is being projected onto the shape from the six sides of a box at the top, bottom, left, right, back and front, and the blend mode blends the edges. So no blend at all. You can almost see where the projection is the seams, as it were, and then as you blend that up, it smooths them in. I found a value of about 0.35 works quite well for most things, so we'll use that. Now I want to change the scaling a little bit. 0.4 in this case, maybe 0.3. Yeah, 0.3 works pretty well. And we're going to be using this to just make the material look a bit like it's been cleaned a bunch of times, and you get that kind of residue from all the wiping and the cleaning and just general grime and dirt build up. So it's a nice texture to use, but we need more control over it. So I'm going to drop in drop in a color ramp. So let's see what that's doing. And what we're going to do here is play with the values. So like we looked at a minute ago with the roughness, which is what that should be connected to, a black value or 0 is 100% shiny, and white is completely diffused practically. So we want a bit more of the black. No, we don't. Sorry, I'm chatting rubbish. We want to lift up the black. We don't want 100% shiny anywhere. So let's lift this up to be a bit of a grey, and maybe bring that down a bit to exaggerate the lines, but maybe bring that down a bit because we don't want anything to be completely diffused. Yeah, something like that should be good. And now let's take a look at the Glossy Shader and see what that's doing. And already you can see that texture coming through just in the glossy reflection, which is going to make a big difference to our finished image. You might not be able to see it that clearly, but let's have a look. Not bad. We might need to play with this just a tad. Really want to see it coming through, but on a plastic material you don't that much. But yeah, something about there should work well. We'll definitely be able to see it more once we render properly. Now we're almost done with this material. All I want to do is create a bit of variation in the colour, because at the moment it's all blue, which is a bit naff. So I'm going to put this RGB node in just so we can easily play around with the colour afterwards. And I'm going to use the same technique that I used in my forest tutorial for doing colour variation. So we need a noise texture. Let's take a look at the noise texture. There we go. Let's change the scaling a bit. And this is basically going to be the variation in our colour. Even that looks a bit extreme. Yeah, that should work quite nicely. So we need two math nodes. And the first one we're going to change to be a multiply and set it to 0 for now. Leave the add at 0.5. And one more node, and that is going to be a hue and saturation. I'm going to reconnect up the shaders now. In fact, no, I won't. I'll leave it on this. We just need to connect our colour in there, and then the add node actually goes into hue node like so. And now we can see what these values are going to do. So the add value basically moves us up and down the hue scale, change in the colour, and the multiply node brings in the effect of this noise texture. So as I lift this up, you'll start to see the pattern there. You can see the noise texture is currently sort of shifting us between blue and purple, but we can adjust that via this. Now we don't want to go quite that extreme, so a subtle amount of variation, probably 0.075 will be fine, which means we need to bring this down just a bit, maybe 0.8, 0.8, 0.48, yeah, no, it's still a bit purpley, 0.47, 0.45, no, that's too much the other way. There we go, 0.465, something like that. That'll do fine. And that gives us a little bit of colour variation. So we'll connect that into our diffuse, reconnect that, and that should be pretty much our shader done. It's still a little bit extreme. Yeah, that should work nice. What I am going to do is lower this a bit, because I don't want a particularly bright plastic. Maybe something like that. Yeah. Okay, so let's run a render and see what that looks like. Okay, so from the first render, there is a few things I'd change. The grime is looking a little too distinct and a bit too shiny in general, so I'd want to tone that down a little bit. But overall it's a hell of a big improvement off the basic sort of plastic shader that you might have been using in the past. Before we move on, however, there's a few things I want to do. We are going to be using some parts of this again. Now what I would normally do is, let's say for this custom Fresnel thing, I'd want to put this in a group, maybe with the value on the outside. Yeah, so I'd probably grab that, hit Control G, and then we've got a group that I can combine them, and we'd be able to then import that in. However, I don't want to create a million node groups here for a tutorial, because I personally find that a bit on the confusing side. So what I'm going to do as a visual aid is stick things in frames, and then we can just bring those in. So let's dump that in there, and we're also going to probably use this grime quite a bit, so let's do the same with that, and probably the color variation thing as well. So let's grab that in a frame group. No, there we go. It just allows us to see a little bit more of what we're doing, and if you press N to bring up this properties thing here, you can name them. So I'll call this the for now, and we'll call that the coal variation, and call that the grime. There we go. So it just neatens things up a little bit, lets us see what's doing what, and it will allow us to come and grab bits as we need them. But for now, let's call that plastic material done, and we'll move on to the next one. But before we close this material, if you hit this little F here, even if the material isn't assigned to anything, it will still get saved with a blend file. So if you want to create like a material library that you can append materials in from, that's the way to do it. Just hit F, and then you can get rid of that. And then if you bring up the material panel, you'll see a little F next to the plastic, which means even though it's not being used, it ain't going anywhere, which is great. So new, and the next one is going to be matte wood floor. Basically a floor material, but any sort of polished wood basically. And it's going to be quite similar to the previous material in some ways, but different in others. So first of all, let's bring in our wood texture. So with the diffuse selected, we can just hit Control T, hit open, and find the wood texture I'm using, which was that one. That one I think I did get from textures.com, if memory serves me. I'm sure you've got plenty of wood textures lying about anyway. And let's do the same again. We'll use an object-based box blend up to about 3 or so. And now we just want to change the mapping a little bit. Maybe 2. Maybe 3. Yeah, that'll do. Come on, Bill, wake up. Right, okay. So let's bring in our Glossy Shader and a Mix Shader, and bam. Now for this we are going to be using Fresnel again, but we don't need the more complicated Fresnel. Just a basic one set to about 1.6 should work quite nicely. Yeah, it doesn't look too bad. And turn that down to about 0.05. Make it a bit on the shiny side, though we will be adjusting the roughness in a moment. But the first thing we're going to do is create some maps based off this texture. One to affect the amount of glossy used, and the other one to create a bump map. So we'll need 2 color ramps, one for each. Here we go. Connect that to there, connect that to there, and shift control and click that one, and bam. So this is going to be our glossy mix. So black will be it'll be just diffuse, and bright white will be all glossy. So we do want quite a bit of it to be glossy, because bear in mind we're going to be mixing this with the Fresnel, so it will be taking some of it away. So something about there should do nicely. And we'll also bring up the black value, because we want the bits that aren't glossy to be quite distinct, just so you can clearly see the variation. And that should work quite well for our glossy map. Now let's make the bump map. And with bump, the black areas will be kind of dug into the object, and any white areas will bump out of it, and a mid-level grey will be flat. So we don't really want anything bumping out, so this grey that we've got here works quite well for us, but we do want to exaggerate the black a bit more. Maybe not that much. And maybe lower this just a tad. Yeah, and that should work quite well for our bump map. Okay, So we've already got this mixing in our glossy. Now what I used to do loads and still see quite a lot is people adding in like another mix shader, connecting the glossy up to that and getting the two to mix that way. Though a much easier way I've started using recently, just whack in a math node like so, drop the glossy map we made into there, and let's see what this node's doing. Now at the moment we're adding, which is not what we want, but if we change it to multiply and swap those over, well, it doesn't really matter which way, does it? No. That gives us the both mixes we want. It's getting more glossy as we get to the more extreme viewing angles, and we're still getting our glossy map coming through, which is perfect, which means that's plugged straight into there and we don't need to do anything else. So if I now look at that and zoom in a little bit, you'll see the glossiness is starting to obey the texture, which is perfect. One thing I do want to do actually at this point is I'm going to drop in a Hue and Saturation Node, because I find that the texture's default color is just a little bit on the orangey side and a bit too saturated. So let's turn that down to maybe a 0.8. Maybe raise that to 0.51, more sort of a beechwood sort of colour, which I think looks quite nice. And make a bit of room there, and drop in a bump map, and drop in our little bump texture that we made there into the height, and the normal into the normal. Let's zoom in. Now you'll see by default we pretty much lost all of our glossiness, and that's just because the strength's way too high. We change that to about a 0.1. You can just start to see it coming through, especially if you go to limit it to the glossy shader. You can see the bump taking effect quite nicely, and that actually should work pretty well. And the only thing left now is to affect the roughness, because at the moment our glossy shader is just the same roughness throughout like we had with the plastic, and we don't really want that. But one thing we do want actually is to adjust this glossy map, because it's not glossy enough, is it? So let's bring that down a bit more. We want a bit of we want it to be shiny. It's polished wood at the end of the day. Yeah, it looks nice. Okay, so if we hit F to make sure this material doesn't go anywhere, go back to our plastic, and now I can just box select that frame, hit Control C, go back to our wood, hit Control V. Ooh, for some reason copied that as well. And then we've got our grime texture, which should still be mapped perfectly, which it is. And then we can just add in a color ramp in case we need to play with it a little bit. And drop that into our roughness on the glossy. Let's view the glossy, and already you can see that's having quite a bit of an effect. See, that's very, very shiny. It's a bit less shiny. It's even less shiny. Somewhere about there should be quite nice. Yeah, and that should be pretty much it for our wood material. But let's hit render and make sure. Alright, that's actually about 5 minutes. That's not too bad. Straight away I'm fairly happy with that. I think that looks quite nice. It certainly do for me. What you'll probably find, I wouldn't be surprised if I get quite a few comments saying I'm not using the right index of refraction values and various other bits and bobs. If you take away anything from this tutorial, the thing I would take away is that a lot of it just comes down to eyeballing, looking at it, tweaking it until it looks the way you want it to look. I personally think that looks like some quite nice polished wood. Hopefully you agree too. Anyway, time to move on. So we've done our plastic and our wood. The next thing we're going to take a look at is glass. So let's close that. So create new material, matte glass dirty, because we're going to make some dirty glass. Oh, that's gone off rendered mode. Could you tell I had to pause the recording? Yeah, don't ask. Right, so we don't need our diffuse shader, so let's get rid of that. And let's bring in our glass shader, which by default isn't too bad at all, but you'll instantly notice that's looking really dark, which we don't want. So you've probably seen this little fix plenty of times before. I'm going to drop in a mix shader and a transparent shader. Yep, there you are. Drop that in there, and then if you bring in a light path node, we're going to tell basically the shadow rays to ignore the glass shader and use the transparent shader, and that instantly brightens everything up. So default glass, and then with that little fix there, instantly a better result. Groovy. Now you can change the amount of effect just by changing basically the color of the transparency. We'll leave it practically at white, so a little bit down from white, and that should give us quite a nice glass. Now by default the roughness is on complete 0, which is fine for a nice shiny glass. In fact, if all you want is nice shiny glass, you're pretty much done. But this is a tutorial on making fun materials, so we're going to do a little bit more to it. For a start, we're going to bring in our grime from the other shader. Where are we? Plastic. Come here, my little friend. Control C, back to the glass, Control V, and just like before, we'll drop in a color ramp to give us a bit more control. Drop that into the roughness of the glass, and we need to zoom in a bit so we can see what we're doing. There we go. So let's bring this value down. Hello, are you working? Yeah, kinda. We might need to go a bit more extreme for it to show up on the glass. We are making dirty glass after all. Yeah, it's starting to show up quite nicely now. I think once it has a chance to render out a bit more, it'll be more obvious. So for now, I'll skip this and just look at the default glass because it's so dark it shows up better. Yeah, that looks quite nice. But we're going to go one step further, because what do you tend to get on glass a lot? You get fingerprints. So let's add in a image texture and go to my textures folder here, and we should have, here we go, hand smudges. Now if you hit Control T on an image texture, it does the same thing and brings in the other two nodes. Again, that's with the Node Wrangler add-on. Let's take a look at what that's doing. Change that to box and object, like so. Blend it in a bit. Yeah, that'll do. For this purpose. Now, obviously, on a glass, you would definitely want to UV unwrap it properly and get the fingerprints in a realistic place. But we're using a material wall, so this will do fine. And what we want to do is basically mix in these two things together. We'll add in another color ramp to give us that control. You're probably noticing at this point I like my color ramps, and I definitely do. And then we're going to go color math node, and we just add the two together. So then when we look at that node, we've got the fingerprints along with the grime. And now I'm looking at it, that grime's obviously way too intense because the fingerprints aren't showing up enough. So let's pull that out a bit, make the fingerprints a bit brighter, because we want those to be the thing that really stands out. Excellent. And then that sits nicely in the roughness. But we can go one step further than that, which is always fun, isn't it? Now, because grime is going to catch the light differently to the glass, what we can do is add in another mix shader, add in a glossy shader, make it quite shiny, maybe a 0.05. So look, maybe even more, 0.02. Might work. And we'll grab this value and use it as a mix. So now it's going to be using this map, the fingerprint map, which is wrong actually, I wanted that one, didn't I? the combined map, this one, to add in a separate glossy shader over the top of the glass, which should give us quite a nice dirty result, which is kind of what we're after. So let's give that a render and see what we got. Right, well that one took quite a bit longer to render, only 12 minutes for that, but that's to be expected with glass, with all the refracting and reflecting and whatnot. And yeah, quite a good result. We've got plenty of grime and fingerprints and dirt and nastiness. One thing I would say, this object that we're using for our materials isn't ideal for this. These kind of really soft edges are giving the glass kind of a plasticky look in places. That's not really the fault of the material that we've just set up. If you put this on a nicely modelled glass, it would come out pretty good. Anyway, let's go back. What are we doing next? We're going to make some marble. So let's close this one down, and we'll create our brain's going in a minute. Matte marble. In fact, no, wake up, Bill. Blah. Okay. Let's get our plastic material, like so. And I'm going to press the 2 button to make a copy of it, and name that marble. Reason being is the materials are quite similar. So we won't need the color variation stuff because we're going to be using a marble texture instead. Let's get rid of all that rubbish. I probably should have grabbed the wood one because we don't need the Fresnel node that we use there. Anyway, let's drop a Fresnel back in there. Set to about 1.8 or so, should work nicely. And then let's drop in our texture. Before I forget, hit F. And let's open up our marble, which is here. Cool. So straight away, because the materials are similar, we're getting quite a nice sort of result there. Let's see how the glossy roughness is looking. Even that's pretty nice. However, we are going to go one step further with it. I'm going to add in a noise texture. Let's have a look at what noise texture is doing. We'll leave it on the default 5. I'm going to whack the detail up to about 8, maybe even more. Yeah. There we go, and let's change the distortion value a bit. 2, 3. Yeah, something about that. What I'm trying to recreate here is, you know, that kind of dirty marble surface where it's been wiped down loads of times, and when you look real closely at it, it hasn't got that nice clean finish that you might find on, say, polished wood. We're basically going to try and recreate that. So first thing we're going to do is dump in another color ramp, probably with quite similar settings to that. Oh, maybe not. Yeah, something like that. And then we're going to mix these values together. Giving us something like that. If I darken this a bit more because we're losing some of our actual texture there. In fact, I'll just lower this value. Sorry if I'm mumbling a bit. I made the mistake of starting this recording really quite late, and it's starting to show. Right, so we'll dump that into our roughness. Perfect. But it doesn't end there. We're going to take this value and we're going to use it to create a very, very slight bump, just to exaggerate that kind of less than a clean surface. Vector bump. Make sure that's in the height. Turn the value down to about 0.1. Even that's probably way too high. Drop that into the Glossy Shader. And now, if we zoom in, I think we went a bit too subtle with the mix there. Let's turn that up. There we go. So you're starting to get that ever so slight bump effect from the from all the grime and dirt that's been quickly wiped down off the marble, but obviously not enough to fully get rid of it. And that's the kind of effect that we're trying to. There we go. That kind of effect there. That is what we want. Perfect. I do think that value is perhaps a little too low though. No, that should come out quite nice. Possibly. What you talking about, Bill? In fact, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to just dump that straight into the roughness. Ooh, no, that looks horrible. What are you talking about, Bill? You're chatting rubbish. Okay, so yeah, you'd want to fiddle with these a little bit more. It's just not quite shiny enough, but I don't want to keep you waiting for a million years. So let's just render it and see what we get. I have noticed one big glaring mistake though. I forgot to change that to box. There we go. That should look pretty good. Yeah, that's actually turned out better than better than it looked in the preview. So marble done, awesome. Let's move on. Close that one down. Make sure it's marked F. Don't forget that. And the next one we're going to do is chrome, but not really shiny chrome, obviously, because we're doing interesting materials today. So I'll do chrome scratched. There we go. So a default sort of chrome material that you would have seen before usually is a couple of glossy shaders mixed together, and we'll be starting with that. Now, because it's a metal, we won't be using a Fresnel. Now, I learned quite recently that even metal should have a Fresnel value in there in some cases, but it's usually such a subtle effect that it's just not really worth doing. This second glossy we're going to set to 0.001, so this is going to be a really shiny shader, and this one's going to be more rough. In fact, this one we're going to base off, have you guessed what yet? Yep, it's going to be our grime group. Where have you gone? I forgot to mark it F, didn't I? There we go. Oh, whatever. There we go. Boom. Oh, I just copied that over. It's all going wrong. There we go. Add in our color ramp. Probably should have just built that into the group thinking about it, but hey. Habits are hard to break. Oh no, we want that in that roughness. And bring that down. Bring this one up a little bit. There we go. And now we're literally just going to manually mix the amount that looks right. So that's going to be just our shader there, and that would just be the shiny one there. But we'll play around with that until we get something that looks about what we want, which is going to be about there. Just that slight hint of the grime coming through, because it is a chrome we're making, so we want it to be quite shiny. And all we're going to do now to make it a little bit more interesting is bring in a scratch material to act as a bump map. So image texture, open textures. Which one was it? I think it was. Oh, now I don't know. Let's go for this one. I'll probably regret it, but hey. Hit Control T to bring in our other node things here, and change that to box. And already, yeah, I'm going to want the other one. That's too subtle. That's more like it. Turn up the blend amount a little and fiddle the numbers until it looks nice. I might try spherical. Ooh, you look pretty. Yeah, but you're not really playing ball now, are you? Ooh. I'm starting to think that has no effect whatsoever. So maybe on sphere, their numbers are much more extreme. Okay, forget it. I'm starting to think we were better off with the other scratches. Yeah, that's going to look nicer. We'll just use a color ramp to bring them out a little bit more. Like so. Yeah. And add in a bump, which will connect to both glossy shaders. And we have some scratches, some really extreme scratches. Let's turn that down. There we go. I think I've got the scaling a bit off there. Let's go to 0.4. Yeah, that looks nice. Oh, and we need to invert the bump map because the colours here, white is obviously up, rather than cutting in, it's bumping outwards. So if we invert the bump map, they'll cut inwards like so, but we need to turn the strength down even more. Really want it to be a subtle sort of effect. Yeah, maybe even turn that down. Yes, nice. So there's our kind of slightly dirty chrome. Let's run that render and see how it looks. Oh, that one was a nice quick render. Looks pretty good. If I was going to render again, I definitely turned down the amount of grime. I'm happy with the scratches, they look okay, but it's just that the grime's a little bit too in your face, but that's easily adjusted. But overall, quite a nice looking scratched up chrome. So that's how you do that. Now, the next material is easily my favourite one. I spent quite a bit of time getting it to look right, and it's quite a bit of fun, so let's get on to that. What we're going to do though is copy this chrome material, and we're going to call this one metal. I'm calling it gunmetal because it would be quite good for quite a few weapons, but also tools that you might find in your garage, like drill bits or like a vice that's mounted on a desk or stuff like that. It would certainly be suitable for that as well. And we're going to keep all of this, however, we're not going to use it yet. So I'm going to put it in a frame just to separate it. Grab all of that. In fact, I'll keep the grime separate because I think we'll also use that on the main part. So I'm going to dump that in there and disconnect that. Okay, so let's start off with 2 glossy shaders, much like we had with the chrome, though we will be doing it a bit differently. Mix those together and drop that into our output. So get that out of the way as well for now. I'm going to hit Control T so we can bring in an image texture, and the one we're going to use for this is where have you gone? This one, Metal Black. Boom. And I'm going to drop that into both of the shaders. Excellent. And I just want to have a look at that on its own so we can get the mapping right. Actually looks pretty good without any adjustments. Cool. Okay. Now we're going to be controlling the roughness of both of these using color ramps off the generating maps from this image texture. So color ramp, boom, and color ramp, boom, and then we'll do separately. So much like we did with what are you doing, Bill? Idiot child. There we go. We want the ramps to be controlling the roughness. So much like we did before, this one's going to be the less shiny one, and this one will be the more shiny one, but both will be based on a map. So we want this one to be quite what's the word I'm looking for? Rough. Yeah, there we go. Bring this in a bit so we can start to see the texture coming through. I'll zoom in a bit. Yep, that's pretty good. And on this one, pretty much same again, but we'll leave that black. Maybe even bring it up a little bit. Okay, a bit of that shine coming through. A bit shinier. There we go. And we'll do a manual mix to decide where we want it. So however shiny you want it. In our case, not that shiny. It's only going to be a little bit of the second shader. Even that's probably too shiny for what we want. Yeah. I think this one needs to be a little less. There we go. That's more like it. Okie dokie. Now we're going to bring in a third glossy shader. And this time we'll set this at about 0.05. Yep. And we'll bring in our grime from this group via a color ramp, which I'll put up here. Sorry if this is getting a bit confusing. Like I said, this material was the one I spent the most time on, so it has gotten a little bit on the complex side. Lower this to bring it out a bit more, and then drop that into the mix. See where we are. Way too shiny. What was I thinking, eh? It's about right, and we just want to lower this value because that's coming in too much. It's supposed to be a subtle effect, and it's not being subtle. Still definitely shinier than I might have wanted. Let's try and fix that a bit. I bet it's you, isn't it? Yeah, you're causing the problem. There we go. So we're getting there. That's our sort of basic come on, Bill. Base for our material. But the fun stuff hasn't even begun yet, because we've still got all of this, which we're now going to bring in via a mix node and a bit of trickery. So let's connect our chrome shader into here. So this mix shader here is mixing in the material we just made with the chrome from the previous one. You're probably thinking, where are you going with this, Bill? Well, I will show you. We're going to grab a geometry node and a color ramp, before I go any further, actually, I'm going to the Subsurf Modifier I've got here, and I'm turning the view up to 3 because we need lots of geometry for what we're about to do. Now, if you connect the pointiness value, which is an odd name if ever there was one, into the color ramp, and then we'll take a look at what the color ramp's doing and adjust these numbers, and basically what it's going to allow us to do is detect the edges of our shape. You can just see them start to come in there. Lower this down. Oh, you're being fiddly today. You weren't like that before. There we go. We're going to have to multiply it because you can barely make it out. So let's add in a math node, set it to multiply. Factor 4 might do the trick. And as you can probably guess at this point, we're going to be using this white value to mix in our chrome to make it look like the edges of the material or the object have been worn away, revealing the bare metal underneath. I love this little method. I picked it up from one of Gleb Alexandros' videos, one on creating metal of some form or another. Can't remember exactly what it's called, but yeah, the guy's a genius, and the second I saw this I was very, very impressed. So I will point out it does take a bit of fiddling with the colour ramp. You're probably picking up on that already, so be patient with it, and you do need plenty of geometry to work with, otherwise you will not get the results you want. Okay, now I'm going to jump to our, in fact we've still got it here, haven't we, the scratches. Those ones are a bit on the subtle side though. I think this is where we need to be, and the other scratches that I used. So we'll bring in a separate image texture, and where are you? The big scratches, there we go. Hit Control T to bring up that. Must be getting sick of the repetition by now. Doesn't look very good, does it? I'm depressing myself, it's not looking good. Yeah, that might work. Wish I could get the spherical view to work properly. What I really should have done is spent the time to UV unwrap that stupid material ball, but it was being a pain, and yeah. This pretty much does the job. You get a few mirrored bits here and there, but if you're applying this to a real object, obviously you would be UV unwrapping, so you get the idea. And now what we're going to do is add in those scratches to the edge detection nodes that we've put in here. So let's add in another math node, and we'll drop that in there, and then add that in there, and drop that in there, and now you can see we've got a nice little map to bring in our chrome. So let's drag that there, connect that into the mix shader, and voila! Not quite as nice as the one I had initially. In fact, I think I know one of the things that's gone wrong. The texture itself is a bit on the bright side. Let's fix that with a brightness and contrast node. Drop that in both the color output, the color inputs of these glossy shaders. Take it down just a bit, minus 0.1 perhaps. Ooh, better already. That's where we were going wrong. Or I say we. That's where I was going wrong. Bam, like so. That's more like it. So, yeah, bit of a complicated node group. So I apologise if your brain's exploding over your screen at the moment. But I think when we render this, we're going to get quite a nice looking result. What I would do though is one final thing, and that's going to be a bump map, which I'm going to connect into these two shaders. Can't believe I'm adding more nodes to this awful mess. One thing I would strongly suggest is spend a bit of time neatening up your node groups. I don't want to waste your time by doing it now, but you don't want to work like this. It's not the way to do it. Right, so this is going to be a bump map. I don't think we even need that color ramp in there. Yeah, we really don't. It's going to be inverted, and we'll just click on that one for now so we just see the raw effect, as it were. Something like that should work quite nicely. Yeah. In fact, I might even need to connect it to that one as well. What it should mean is our glossy areas just look like they're being indented just a little bit. Is that cutting off some of my gloss? Oh, my brain's going numb. Right, I figured it out. I think part of the problem is our scratches aren't quite white enough. So I'm going to duplicate this multiply node so we can just make those stand out a little bit more, like so, because we really want all these scratches to be white, so it's mixing in pretty much all of the chrome in those areas. There we go, that's showing up a bit better. Yeah, that's probably a bit too much. Get the idea though. So now when we reconnect our normals here, it should look pretty good. It really isn't having that much of an effect. Am I doing something wrong? I don't know. Yeah, I really don't think that's having much of an effect, so I'm just going to take it out. Okay, let's render that and see how it looks. Okay, so yeah, we've definitely gone. The other ones I've just left the slight adjustments, but this one's definitely too extreme with the old scratches there, and that's being controlled here. So let's turn that down to about a 1. Maybe change these values around a little. Oof. Yeah. So I won't do a whole re-render, but we definitely went too high with the scratches there. As you can see, it just looks like a total mess. But with it turned down like that, that will come out quite nice. And that's pretty much it. The next material, don't worry, is nowhere near nearly as complicated, and it's also the last one. So let's get finished up, shall we? Close that down. I'm actually going to, on this ball, just add in a really basic diffuse, because we're going to be using a different object for this one. Yeah, that should do nicely. And let me just activate this layer here, and then we've got this draped cloth to create a cloth material on. So new material, cloth, and let's get going. So we'll start off with a diffuse shader mixed with a velvet shader. Now what a velvet shader does is the faces that are pointing directly at the camera tend to darken up a little bit, and you can make that more extreme by changing it. I'm guessing it's basically just a diffuse shader mixed with a layer weight or something very similar to that, but we'll just leave it on the default of 1, and we'll manually mix the let's try that again, manually mix these together until we get the amount we want. We basically just want a subtle effect, but we do want it there. So yeah, something about a 0.4 ish nice and precise there will be a good start. Next thing we're going to do is bring in a image texture. So let's find it, and it's this fabric one here. Let's just take a look at it directly. Might have a little bit to do with the scaling. What do you reckon? We'll use, in fact, no. Sorry, this cloth I have UV unwrapped properly, so we can leave that on flat and UV and just change the scaling. Let's try 20, 50. 50 would probably work quite well, but just so we can see what we're doing, I'm going to lower it to 40. Yeah, that should work pretty well. But one thing I want to do immediately is mix in a color ramp, because it's looking a bit grey and I want it to be not grey. So let's bring this white value down a bit until we get some white. Perfect. Now I'm going to drop that into both the diffuse and the velvet shader. And then we need to mix in a glossy shader. So let's bring in another mix. Oi, thank you. And a glossy. Oh, we just click on the right thing, you idiot. There we go. All right. A little bit on the shiny side, I'm sure you'll agree. So I'm going to hit F so we don't lose this material, and I'm going to grab our swanky Fresnel setup here. Like so, drop that in, and that will get rid of the shininess. Nice. But if I change this to a bright sort of pink colour, you can see it still just about has an effect. Very, very slight, and that's all we want. But I am going to sharpen that up just a tad. Yeah, that should work pretty well. Alright, get rid of the saturation and all that rubbish. Boom, boom, boom. Awesome. Okay, next thing I want to do is bring in another image texture. And this time it's going to be the pattern for our cloth, which is this one here. And then I'm going to create a color mix RGB, and I'm going to multiply in the values. So let's connect that into both of our diffuse and velvet shader, and I'm going to bring in the color from this one, but use the alpha as a mixing point. Bam! And now we have a pattern. But we do want to adjust it a little bit because it looks a bit rubbish. So let's try that. Maybe rotate it around a little bit till we get something that looks relatively nice. Whatever. Yeah, that should work pretty nice. Quite an easy material, this one, actually. But it does take... It took me a while to get it looking the way I wanted it to look. So that's worth bearing in mind. We've got a subsurf on there. We do not. I'm going to add in a subsurface modifier just to give us a bit more detail. No, not solidify. Subsurf. Thank you. Okay. So all that's really left for the cloth then is, well, obviously light passes through the cloth. Now on this material ball, this logo of mine is actually an emission, and it's not shining through the cloth at all, which obviously a thin bit of cloth on an illuminated surface, you'd see through it, and we want to replicate that. So let's add in a mix shader, and then add in a transparent shader, like so. And you can start to see we're getting the result we want. But what we want to do is mix this in using the holes in the cloth. So that's actually quite easy to do. So let's add a color ramp so we can adjust things, and then we'll grab our image texture and drop that in there, and let's see what this color ramp's doing. So the white values are going to be where the transparency comes through, and grey and black will fade it out. So we want these little holes in the fabric to be white in our map and everything else to be black, or at least a very dark grey. So let's flip that over. Getting there already. As you can see now, the holes are white, and if we drag this chap down, it will exaggerate that effect. You could go all the way to there, but we're going to just lift it up just a little bit to about there, and that should work nice. Drop that into the mix shader, and then bam, you can see the light coming through in a relatively realistic way. At least I think so. So let's give that a render, and that will be our final material for today, done and dusted. Right, and there's our cloth. I probably want to do a little bit more to it. It's looking a bit clean for my taste, and if you've gathered from the rest of the tutorial, I don't like clean materials. But it's certainly a good base to get started from. I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial. I'm sorry if I've rambled on a little bit and my brain's been failing me throughout. It's about 3 AM in the morning right now. So yeah, I think we did all right considering. I did, as I probably mentioned in my last tutorial, I did have a plan to do one on an autumn lake scene, and after spending an insane amount of time doing recordings and whatnot, it hasn't panned out as expected, so I've basically binned that idea for now, in favour of doing this one. Hopefully it will give you a nice basis for creating all sorts of materials. We've pretty much everything you'd use in interior arc-viz scenes, you've got a good basis for, as well as pretty much most materials other than natural stuff. The only thing we really didn't touch upon is like dirt and ground and grass and trees and all that sort of stuff, and that's an entirely different sort of ball game outside of the scope of what we wanted to cover here. But yeah, I'm gabbing on again, so I will leave it there, and I will see you next time. As always, thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date with tutorial releases, and if you like, add me on Twitter and Facebook, where I'll post up details of upcoming tutorials as well as answer any Blender questions you may have. Look forward to talking to you. Bye for now.